customer sent us an Xbox Series S, and this one has HDMI port damage, so we're going to go ahead and replace the HDMI port for the customer. Yeah, I don't know if you can see the damage, but it doesn't look too bad. I imagine we won't have any problems with the traces in there, but once we open it up, we'll take a look. I've already removed one of the screws here. We're going to take off this plastic and remove the screw on this side. And these are the Torx screws. I believe they're Torx 9. Even though it's a little too tight, you probably could get away with an 8, but who knows. All right, and this just slides up. We have a couple of screws here. Probably should use the drill over there, to be honest with you. Really reminds me of opening up an Xbox 360. Of course, these screws are a bit longer than the ones they had for the CPU and GPU back then. There's how she looks. Gonna need to remove these. Hands are already tired, and that just slides right up. Be nice and gentle when you're getting this fan out. There you go. Just wiggles from side to side and it'll come right out. Take this out. Now it'll lift up. All right. Now the board is exposed. Can we repair this HDMI port without removing that heatsink? I believe we can. All right, so this is going to be an interesting repair, mostly because, as you know, this board is probably going to be soaking up a lot of heat in this area right here. So we're going to have to probably use some low melt solder. So I just happen to have some right here. We're going to apply some flux to the HDMI port. Before I do any soldering, I'm going to remove this pad. I believe it to be a grounding pad, probably for static discharge. We're just going to add a decent amount of this low melt solder. Should aid in the removal process of this port. So I'm going to add some flux. And now we're going to add some hot air to this son of a gun here. And I'm going to remove this guy. So we're going to be using some heat in this area and I don't want to burn it. Our hot air looks like it's reached temperature. We're just going to sit on this for a little bit until it's time to remove this guy. Now, of course, you do want to be careful with this next part because we do have traces and I don't really want to be rebuilding anything. There we go. So here's our guy. So now we're going to go ahead and clean up the pads and prepare it for the new HDMI port. Once this thing is done making its noise, of course. All right, I'm going to add some flux to this. Probably add just a tad bit more of this low melt solder to make the cleaning process a little bit easier. For those of you that are wondering, I'm using a Hakko FX 951. I swear by these, just because you can swap out all the tips so easily, and there's quite an assortment of tips that you can use with it. Plus, you can go up to 450C or go even lower. That really depends on what you're working on. I put the flux in the holster for the soldering iron. And speaking of soldering irons, I have this guy right here. I don't know if you've seen it, but it can use the same tips as the Hakko soldering iron, which is amazing. And of course, it's a fraction of the cost. We may consider carrying that in our shop in the future, so make sure you check by. All right, we're going to be using our Hakko FR301 desoldering gun. That should make this a whole lot easier. And if you don't have one of these, you can use desoldering wick. That works just as well. If you want to get a really good shot of how it's done, it's right here. We're going to go ahead and use some leaded solder for this part. I'm just going to go over the pads really quick with this. And I don't know if you can see that, but it looks pretty good. All right, so we have our replacement HDMI port right here. You want to make sure that that is aligned correctly because you will not get another chance without much difficulty. Yeah, it's looking pretty good so far. We'll go ahead and mount it down here with some solder. All right, looks like it went through for the first one. I'll change out the gloves though. And you just want to transfer a good amount of heat to these pads because we want to have the solder go right through. That way this port adheres properly and doesn't come loose on the customer. So we do not want to have any repeat failures. So let's make sure our alignment is good, and it is, but the port isn't far enough down. So I'm going to use a little bit of heat. All right, let's see how we're looking over here. Excellent. We're going to begin the process of soldering the legs of the HDMI port to the traces of the board. So it looks like we have a little bit of touching up to do, specifically with these pins right here. Obviously, they're probably not attached right now, and I'm not going to bother prodding them. Then we'll probably add a little bit of solder to these pads around here to make sure this thing doesn't move. All right, so there's how the port looks. I think I'm going to reinforce the outer edges real quick before I progress to the next side. All right, looks like we have a pretty good bond there. So now we're going to go over the legs of this HDMI port. So we're just going to add a tiny bit of solder to our tip here. And this thing doesn't really transfer heat all too well, does it? We'll add some flux, even though it looks like there's plenty. So just add a tad bit more. Almost put that thing in the holster again. We'll go ahead and go back to the old tip. Ah, yes, much better. We have a little bit of solder there, so now we're going to need to use a little bit of desoldering wick. Make one more pass. You're just gliding over this. You're not really pressing down too hard. Let's go ahead and clean this a little bit so we can see what's going on. We're going to go ahead and prod the pins. Now the one that I thought was questionable is fine. We'll go ahead and clean this just a tad bit more. And no bridges. Pretty good. All right, we're going to reassemble the console. That way I can test the HDMI port out. All right, so we have the customer's Xbox right here. Go ahead and plug the HDMI in and the power. All right, and there we are. We've got sound and everything. It's like it's working pretty good. We've successfully completed the repair of the HDMI port on this Xbox Series S. If you enjoyed this video or if you found it helpful or useful, remember to leave us a like and subscribe. And thanks for watching.